Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about mass migration to Australia, and this I think could apply really to any Anglosphere country controlled by the globalists, and they control pretty much all of them. Is the opposition party in Australia that was talking tough about drastically reducing mass immigration. The federal election is supposedly imminent, and according to their polling, they're going to easily win the election and take government next calendar year. So almost the minute they realised they were going to win the election easily, or presume they will, they suddenly changed their rhetoric on mass immigration. Went from drastically reducing immigration to suddenly it was, wow, skills, we need skills. The economy can't grow without skills. And so where are these skills coming from? Well, they're coming from third world countries and illiterate masses of illiterate peasants, who've never worked, have no skills, no job. They're illiterate in their own language, can't speak a word of English. They're the ones who are going to bring these skills in to help the Australian economy grow. Skills! And so it was an instant change in my view at least, an instant change in rhetoric. Now, there's very much a uni-party thing going on in Australia, as indeed there is in Britain and Canada and New Zealand and so on, that the globalists control all the major parties. And the central plank of the globalist project is mass peasant immigration into the West. So now, in order to win, curry favour with the voters, any political party that's wanting to gain office will talk tough about they're going to get tough on immigration. But the reality is, of course, they're part of the uni party, and the minute they get in or are convinced they're going to get into government, then their language completely changes. And you can see this, say, in the United Kingdom very clearly, Australia too, that every political party talks, we're going to really get tough on this immigration and legal immigration and mass immigration. The reality is they do the exact opposite. In fact, not only do they not do what they say they're going to do, they do the exact opposite, and they think it's quite acceptable to lie and cheat and deceive the voting public because the globalists have predetermined mass immigration is how it's going to go, and they're the uni party, and the globalists control all the major political parties. You'll get some smaller parties on the edge that'll talk out against it, but they've got no real political power. So anyway, coming to Australia, so it's difficult to believe anything the government tells you. Since the globalists took control of Western governments, then every statistic you see is either an outright lie, or it's been refashioned and politicized so that it fits into the narrative. So in Australia, supposedly the birth rate is 1.5 births per woman. Now, you can sort of play around a bit with the numbers here, because when these the birth rates were high, 2.5 births per woman, the amount of women who lived past the age of 70 was very, or say lived past the age of 75 was very few. Now there are hundreds of thousands of women over the age of 75. Now, women that are 75, 80, 90 years old, 100 years old, they tend not to have children. So given the amount of older women increase, so that the amount of women who are outside of childbearing age increases, then you get a much higher number of non-childbearing women that are alive, unlike the post-World War II baby boom, for example, where you get a very high proportion of younger, relative to the total population of young, and then going right through to once the baby boomers were turning 18 or 19. Even when I left high school, it was quite common quite common maybe is overstating it, not unusual for girls to leave high school and get married straight away and have children. So it wasn't unusual to see 17-year-old girls with children. I thought, some of them would come back to school to show off their babies, and they look terribly grown up and mature and so on to me. And but anyway, it wasn't unusual. So, but it's changed now that there's a much greater number of women who are outside of childbearing age, but the statistic is still the same. So how many births per woman? But there are a lot more women outside of childbearing age, therefore that skews the statistics. So really it's women within childbearing age, how many children do they have? And that would change the picture quite considerably. But I've noticed wading through a few government reports, they flip back and forth between, without telling you they're doing it, by the way, they flip back and forth between the two. So it's all women in one sort of chapter or one page. Then they move to a tighter specification. Women say women between 18 and 44, but they're not telling you that they're doing this. So the numbers jump around, the statistics jump around because they're using a different frame of reference depending on the political agenda they want to push. But last year, in fact, the last few years, the amount of in Australia, the amount of births has exceeded. Remember, Australia's only got a population of I think just about 27 million now. The amount of births exceeded deaths by something like 90 to 100,000, and that's been the last few years. So births are handsomely exceeding deaths, but primarily because people are living longer, of course. But nonetheless, and if you've got a lot of people that are sort of drooling and vegetables in a nursing home, then they're hardly going to be procreating. So that again skews the numbers. But this idea that there's no births or there's not insufficient birth, once you remultiply those numbers back, the births per woman, you remultiply those numbers to represent the difference between the average age, say, of the population in 1970 versus the average age of the population today, and then you readjust births for those numbers, then the births per woman are actually not that much different. They're a little bit less. So instead of 2.5, they're 2.2, for example. But they're not outside of the replacement rate. So once you take off that top tier of people, say over the age of 80, and then you recalculate on that basis, then the births are quite healthy. Now the other factor obviously is with mass immigration. Something like 5 million people from the third world have been brought into Australia in the last 20 years. Now, that's 25% of the Australian population was just dumped in, on top of natural births, dumped in over that time, which give you an idea to the extent to which, and these people are procreating. I was recently at a heavy migrant intensive area where it seemed like every brown and black person I met had a child on the way, one that was barely walking and another baby in some sort of a stroller, so they're certainly so the majority of children being born are definitely not white. So I think within the next 30 years, Australia will be less than 50% white, and there'll be a lot of people, the Indians and the Chinese, and also who, if they don't hate us, the white people, then they're certainly not. They're certainly rejoicing over the idea that will be a minority in this country. Anyway, coming to the issue of births and immigration now. There's a lot of talk all the time about, we have to have a migration because there's not enough births per woman and so on. When you recalculate out the 80 plus population, which has grown incredibly over the last 50 years, the idea of somebody, I remember as a kid, there was a lady down the road, her husband already died, and she reached the age of 80. In fact, I can picture it now in my mind, and I'm like 5 years old or something. I remember all the adults talking about, wow, she got to 80. Whoa, that is insane. 80 years old, that's incredible. And She's going to die any minute now, 80 years old. How can she laugh? And she seemed very frail and in frail health, and from what I remember anyway. And so unusual that someone got to the age of 80. Now it's no great shakes. There are people at the age of 90 that can survive for 5 years. They're already sort of zombied out vegetables at 90, but they can still survive another 5 years in the retirement homes and so on. So how do they? These are part of the population. Most of those are women. So again, this needs to be understood in the overall statistical picture. In terms of the immigration, then there's the talk. Well, we're not. It's 1.5 births per woman. That's not enough. We can't replace her, so we need migrate. Now, just crunching the numbers in Australia, if we assume even the 1.5 to be accurate, if they weren't counting all the older women who are 100 years old and so on, if they weren't counting that, or who are outside of childbearing age even, then the amount of migrants that Australia would need, assuming again 2.1, or that statistical average per woman, whether it's achieved through natural births or migration, that about 50,000, but 45, 50,000 would give you those numbers. So the migration rate doesn't need to be high, and 50,000 is far more sustainable than 500,000, which is what we got at the moment, but in Australia. But this idea of needing to have this 2.1, I would question that. But let's run with it at the moment, because it's creating massive inefficiencies in our economy. The flooding of cheap peasant labour is creating the most inefficient economy imaginable. So I don't think it's a plus or a bonus in any way. Nonetheless, 50,000 people would be all you'd need. Some of those would have young children, so then you'd pick up a bonus population, if you like, out of that. But the statistical reality is that between 3 and 5% of migrants to Australia, and you get the same results in Canada or Britain, for example, the United States. So it's a universal first world thing. Only between 3 and 5% of the mass migrants coming in are useful to the economy. That is, they can get jobs pretty much straight away. They speak good English. They've got internationally recognised qualifications. They have skills that are needed in the economy. And so that's 23. Let's say 4% for sake of argument. That means last year when 500,000 people came in, were brought in by the crazy globalist controlled flunky stooge government here in Australia. 500,000 people were brought in. About 20,000, give or take. Let's be generous and say 25,000. 25,000 of them are actually useful and desirable and wanted and needed in the economy. Now, many of those have children, not all, but many of those have children. So you'd still probably come close to hitting your 40 to 50,000 anyway in overall numbers. So a skilled migration program would pretty much give Australia what it needed. So why are 500,000 being brought in, given the vast majority of those are illiterate peasants? So it doesn't make any sense. They're the people that I see, when I was in the downtown Sydney last time in peak hour, there's these 4'9" tall Asians with serious back and knee problems that are going to need a lot of medical care, and they're the ones that work in all the takeout food stores and the shitty retail shops in the malls downtown and so on. Are they really needed? And if so, then how bad are the working conditions and wages in those shops? If those shops can't survive in anything other than labour hire scam, cheap labour, third world peasant labour, then shouldn't the economy be realigning itself and readjusting around those economic realities rather than trying to continue this delusional economy, this non-competitive delusional economy that relies on third world peasant slave labour? I mean, shouldn't there be an alignment there anyway? But coming to this opposition party that's pretty convinced it's going to win government, at least if we're to believe anything they say, and they've probably been given these lines anyway that read out by the globalist secretariat. They think there's a minimum of, remember Australia's got a population of 27 million, there should be a minimum annual intake of about 160 to 200,000 immigrants. Now that's 4 times more than needed. So that means that they're going to bring in, want to bring in well over 100,000 illiterate peasants every year as a minimum. Now, once they say that that's the number, it'll be double that in reality. They insist this is needed because of the skills. There's a shortage of skills. The economy can't grow. We've got no skilled people at all in Australia. We've got nobody who knows anything. And so we're going to get these illiterate peasants from these mud huts in the middle of Africa, and they're going to be the skills that we need. I mean, the absurdity of that argument it's insane, for goodness sakes. But that's what they're trying to push. And they're not really getting any questioning by the media. It's just being nodded and waved through without so much as a question or the slightest pushback. But the reality is that Australia could manage very nicely, thank you, from now on approximately 50,000 migrants here. It would be good quality control. They'd be skilled migrants. They could be, because of the nature of them, they would speak English. They're credentialed. They're qualified. They're accomplished, and they could come to Australia and fit in quite easily and contribute to the economy and be a benefit to the economy. And this would be, I think, the perfect sort of solution. You would give the population balance and increase that supposedly is such a big deal, and it would also bring in the actually needed skills, not supposed skills of dishwashing and floor sweeping and so on. They're not fucking skills. So anyway, but it doesn't look like we're going there. The uni party, again, controlled by the globalists, and the mass migration will continue. All we can really hope for is that the incoming Trump administration will be just as aggressive in dismantling globalization around the world as the previous governments were aggressive in forcing globalization upon the world. And let's see what happens there. You've been able to tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.